The Mind's Eye with DJ BJ Turnoff is available on Stitcher Radio, iTunes, and all major platforms. Appreciate you listening. Appreciate you subscribing. Feed your head, engage your brain, and enter the Mind's Eye. You're now standing at the intersection of history and mystery, science and the strange, and crime and the sublime. I'm DJ BJ Turnoff, your humble host along this auditorium of audacity. Yellow. Been a spell, huh? Well, we're back now and going strong throughout the rest of the year. We got a bunch of shows lined up. Go check them out now, themindseye.media.com. But you don't want to hear about the past. You don't want to hear about the future. Let's talk about the here and now. We'll tell you about the elite scientists and technologists who believe that humanity's destiny is to populate the stars. I believe that too. Space historian Dr. Fred Nadis, he crash lands on planet Mind's Eye. He's going to tell you about his latest star settlers, the billionaires, geniuses, and crazed visionaries out to conquer the universe. While he's here, Dr. Fred Nadis, he's going to answer the most important space questions on your mind, like how do they poop in space? Where does all that poop go? And is sex possible? I mean, I do hear that space could possibly be a natural Viagra or the opposite. Maybe, just maybe along the way, we might also a little bit tell you about what the future of space exploration looks like 10, 20, 50 years, including space tourism and space colonies. Are we alone? Are there other habitable planets in our universe? But let's be serious. I know which ones you want to know the answer to. But first, I need you to prepare for light speed. No. Light speed is too slow. Light speed is too slow. Yeah, we're going to have to go right to ludicrous speed. The Mind's Eye blasts off after this commercial break. Stay with us, Colonel Sanders, or don't be chicken. We're back on the Mind's Eye, and I just got to get something off my chest about China. Outside of it being a communist country, hiding COVID numbers, no resemblance of a justice system there, unbelievable amount of overt human right abuses, and about a million other reasons. The Chinese government, in relation to this episode, what's pissing me off is that it doesn't share any space knowledge at all with the rest of the world. Listen, I get it. Everyone has secrets. We keep secrets. But China keeps everything a secret when it comes to their space exploration and space program. Well, the thing is, when you launch spaceships into space, you really can't keep it all a secret. China's mysterious reusable experimental spacecraft has safely landed after a 2-day mission in space and may have even deployed a newly found mysterious object. No one even knows what this object is. Thanks, China, for the warning. We got this and a bunch of other articles if you want to brush up on space exploration, amongst other topics. It's on Facebook and Twitter at Mind's Eye Show. Also, don't forget to vote on our latest Twitter poll. Would you live on Mars if allowed? And the results right now are pretty split, 55-45 in favor of yes. Cast your vote, again, at Mind's Eye Show for Twitter and Facebook. Also, quick links are available on our website, themindseye.media.com. We'll be back in a Mind's Eye moment with Dr. Fred Nadis on humanity's destiny in the stars. Dr. Fred Nadis now joins us, self-described late bloomer or latecomer to the game of science and math. It's better late than never. Appreciate a slice of your time, Doctor.
Thanks for having me here.
Appreciate it. I'm thinking about starting with a curveball, but I guess we'll see how you react to this one, and then we'll really get down to the meat of the show with the book. Okay. And I guess you're right all the time, so I'm not even sure if this even applies to you. But do you watch any TV at all?
Oh, occasionally, yeah.
What's your sci-fi show? I just want to know because you're a big sci-fi, science lover.
This is gonna be terrible, but I don't really do it. I tried Man in the High Castle for a while because I was a Philip K. Dick fan. But I just feel like when they draw the storylines out so far, it just becomes Shaggy Dog to me after a while. So that's just me. Yeah, beautiful production, et cetera, et cetera. But they lose me.
Started off strong, but I kind of petered out there in the end a little bit. What about this? Is probably one of my favorite sci-fi shows, The Expanse. Have you seen that by any chance?
I have only I don't have Amazon right now. I think that's Amazon, but they do. I know they do a lot with the space colony notion and mining, but I really haven't seen more than the once again one episode.
Yeah, almost everything we talk about it. You talk about in the book is on there. And Jeff Bezos is, if he wasn't bald, he'd be pulling out his hair right now. You must be the one person who's not with Amazon. So good for you. God bless you. There's still a couple out there. So let's talk about the new book. I loved it. Really fascinating. Star settlers, the billionaires, geniuses, and crazed visionaries out to conquer the universe. A lot to touch on. Let's start with some of the contemporary news that was mentioned in the book that has, really been picking up some steam recently. So after 5 decades of nothing, multiple countries are now trying to get to the moon or go back to the moon. U.S., China, Russia, amongst others. Why the recent push to the moon?
I think there's just so much amassed fascination with space again, and sort of jockeying between different nationalists, if you will, programs, as well as a lot of the new entrepreneurs. And it just became readily apparent that the moon's a lot easier than trying for Mars, or now it sounds like Venus is the new. It's literally a hot spot. That'd be a tough planet to visit, no matter what. But yeah, so I think the realistic thing is once they start planning, well, we're talking about these long-term mining colonies or whatnot. The moon, unfortunately, I think it's a little bit drabber. The astronaut who visited, one of the first astronauts there, called it magnificent desolation. I guess that was Buzz Aldrin. So, and he said, this is no place for housekeeping. And I think people believed him for several decades. But I think now that we got all these rockets and we got all these rocket companies, and that just starting to make more sense to work with the moon.
You talked about in the book Project Horizon, which was a moon-based plan dating back to 1959. I mean, do you think it's possible that the U.S. or some other whatever country's going to the moon is going to be trying to build one in the near future?
That is what they're claiming, and also we should say the European Space Agency is very much talking about it. They have their plan called Moon Village. And they're trying to be a little bit more, not idealistic, but a little bit more less nationalistic about it. And the idea of making it a multicultural, mixed-use kind of colony with scientists outposts, as well as corporate outposts, mining interests, and tourism. So I think that's what people are looking at, and they're pretty serious about it because they have inflatables and other kinds of even just modular housing they can set down there pretty easily. I mean, I shouldn't say easily, but I think the rockets are capable of carrying them at this point. That's what they told me at the architectural firm that was working with the ESA. So I think it's likely. It's always hard to say for sure. It's more likely than a Mars expedition, though.
The Outer Space Treaty, 1967, essentially says that outer space is a peace area. But we fight over resources here. We're probably going to fight over resources in space, I would imagine. So with space mining that you brought up before, I mean, it seems to be the next gold rush. I mean, do you think space mining could lead to some type of warfare in space, or is really the Outer Space Treaty something that people are going to adhere to?
That's a great question. Obviously, I am on this. I would like to see the treaty adhered to. I mean, it's already essentially been broken, though, in that the treaty also said that outer space was the domain of all humanity, and private interests really could not claim it, and that has been a U.S. law. Obama signed off on allowing corporations to go ahead and stake claims on asteroids at the very least, and other companies have followed suit. From what I've heard about, this is not my specialty, but on the warfare front, I guess the main thing is anti-satellite technology these days. And the U.S. has an edge on that in creating these anti-satellite. This could be very dangerous, apparently, because of all the space debris that could create all sorts of problems for spacefaring if you have a lot of orbiting space debris interfering with, pretty dangerous. Could damage spacecraft and satellites. So I don't think anyone is seriously talking about, like they were in the 50s, about putting nuclear weapons on the moon.
Outlandish.
That was another day and age, I hope, and I don't think we're seeing that kind of militarized front, even with our space forces. I think it's more this idea of getting the upper edge and threatening the satellite. And frankly, it's obviously it has to do with surveillance and spying, but also it might well have to do with private interests as well, with both Bezos and Elon Musk are working.
Yeah, I mean, that's the reason why Space Force was created, right? Because it was kind of an anti-spying type thing more so than military in space.
Yeah, I think it's just bringing together, groups from different military units that already existed to support space flight and, the rescue teams and whatnot. So it's not. I don't think we're quite in the Star Wars realm right now of trying to literally militarize space like that.
Jeff Bezos and he's kind of betting on the moon, space tourism, space colonies.
Mm-hmm.
Musk is really focused on Martian, human Martian settlements. Who do you think is going to get it first, and who do you think is probably right in the long run?
I don't have a definite answer for that. As far as Mars is very alluring and seductive, I think. I was really not a space type person at all until I started seeing some of those photos from the Mars rovers and just these amazing landscapes, and it essentially, wow, that's pretty close to Earth. It's pretty close to the Utah or Nevada landscapes. That almost seems like a home, And so I think there's a real interest in Mars. Also, there's a lot of parallels. The day there is 24.7 hours. So it's practically an Earth cycle, although you get a little extra sleep, I guess. And it has seasonal shifts. The temperature range is pretty crazily cold, but not unworkable. I can see where the allure is for Mars and as the next big step for people. As far as I think both of them are interested obviously in profiteering and in the tourism market, and so I'm sure Musk is getting involved in the moon game, if you will, as well. Bezos came up with support with this idea from the 70s, Gerard Anil's space colonies notions. He was a Princeton physicist who he was working in high energy physics and working on cyclotrons, and decided to apply it to be a NASA scientist / astronaut. And he didn't get in the Corps, but he just became fascinated with space. And so he began imagining not going to planets like Mars, but creating these giant space colonies, which I think in that television show that Bezos Amazon has on Expanse, you see a lot of these big space colonies. Mm-hmm. Some of them that they cooked up could have as much landmass as Vermont. These giant cylinders, and how they were going to build them. They were going to get the material from the moon and slingshot it out on these electromagnetic drives and so on and so forth. Manufacture materials out in space. They were going to beam power back to the Earth, so they were going to be helping with the energy crisis at the time. So it was in some ways utopian, and in some ways not ignoring environmental movement, but kind of trumping it. Not to use the Trump as a pun there, but as more. This is our end run around the problems of yes, we do have limited resources on the Earth, so let's create these space colonies at Lagrange points, and we can Bezos a few years ago talked about housing trillions of people someday, off Earth and creating the Earth as a giant national park of some sort, or international, I should say. So that's that. I don't think since they're such giant visionaries or pretending to be, ultimately there's not much of a difference there. It's this big vision that humanity must expand into the cosmos or be a failure, and it's also this perhaps insight that the way things are going, we are really messing up the planet, and we're not turning off the off switch on capitalism or anything else that's creating climate change.
When can we realistically expect to touch down on Mars?
Everyone I talk too seems to think it really won't be till the 2040s, maybe the 2030s. I think Musk would like to make it earlier. But when I first started researching the book, he was talking about, I think, 2022 would be the first landing he was planning on Mars, and that's certainly not going to happen if we're not going to even get back to the moon by then. Even when I went to the Mars Society convention, which these are the diehard Mars fans, the Mars or bust is the slogan, and I talked to about 50 people there, and they're all like, I just hope that before I die, a human will step down on Mars again. This vision of a giant colony appearing, to tens of thousands to a million, like Musk is talking up, I don't think anyone seriously considers that happening in the short run.
And he's not exactly building any confidence with some of the statements he makes. I think one was he said that when we do go there, the first wave of settlers, Martian settlers, are going to be, are most likely going to die there. And you actually spoke with, I think, one of these Mars One finalists, future Martian. What was she like? And I think, your interview happened before that statement, but, did she speak to that idea as well?
I'm trying to remember. I mean, she was not a flake. She was a postdoc in astronomy working at one of the facilities here in Southern California. She had been influenced by the Kim Stanley Robinson trilogy of books about terraforming Mars, the Red Mars, Green Mars, Blue Mars, I think it is. That had a big influence. And I think they just feel like they are willing to sacrifice themselves if that's necessary, because they do have this vision of humanity. Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, the Russian pioneer of all this back in maybe around 1900, was saying, the Earth is a cradle for mankind, and you have to leave your cradle at some point. And I think people really, really latch onto that notion that there's something bigger in store for humanity, and they're willing to, set out like Polynesians in their outrigger canoes for points unknown. So that was kind of the attitude I got from talking to her and one other of the Mars 100 finalists.
And not only do we want to leave the womb, I guess, Earth is our womb, but we kind of have to. I remember in science class, and I think this was probably in middle school, and we were talking about stars and how eventually our sun's going to burn out.
Right.
So it gave me two thoughts pretty much. Wow, that's just depressing as hell. And then two, we need to master interstellar space travel. What's the front on interstellar travel? What's the most promising tech?
But when I talk to the people in the interstellar community, for example, right near me in Santa Barbara at the University of California, there is the Experimental Cosmology Group, and they, I think briefly, were working with Yuri Milner, another one of these billionaire types. They floated this idea of a interstellar probe, and in the past, any plans for interstellar probes just were staggeringly expensive and required more energy than was available on the Earth, basically. But they came up with a new plan, and apparently they borrowed the technology from DARPA, the Defense Research Group. That was set up at the same time as NASA was after Sputnik, when America was in a big panic about our science capabilities. In any case, their idea is to have a huge array of, I think, fairly large laser beams, but you can't create a giant mega laser beam. So they want to have an array of, hundreds of thousands, perhaps, lasers set up in the desert that would all converge and essentially create a giant laser to propel. They're talking about a 1 gram space, what they call a star chip. So this is not a human flight. This is a probe that would be packed with a lot of sensors and radio links and ability to send back data. And their big goal is to send this off to the Alpha Centauri star system. I believe it's a triple star system. And at the speed, at 2/10 the speed of light, or 0.25 even. So, an immense speed by propelling it with this array of lasers. And everyone agrees that that's pretty much the way to go. They say these beamers, you can't really take it with you. There's just most of the systems. Imagine you just don't have enough fuel to take on board any kind of spaceship to get it to the nearest stars. I did not find any actual starship designs. There was I think it was DARPA had in 2011 brought together a lot of these technologists, some of them science fiction writers, to try to imagine I think it was called the Century Starship Program. Within 100 years, how could you create a starship? And one of the participants, a guy named Lou Friedman, who worked at JPL for many years and helped founded the Planetary Society. He's saying, well, look, let's talk about robotic missions, and everybody wants to create these giant spacecraft for humans. And he said he got voted down 25-1. I guess there were 25 or 26 of them. So there's just this kind of relish for imagining, getting humans to these other star systems.
Yeah, I was going to say, but let's just put a pin in the conversation just for a moment, take a quick break.
Sure.
We will be right back with Dr. Fred Nadis. This is The Mind's Eye. We're back with Dr. Fred Nadis. We are talking about his book, Star Settlers, The Billionaires, Geniuses, and Crazed Visionaries Out to Conquer the Universe. Still got a lot left to talk. I mean, we haven't even talked about extraterrestrials and us bumping into them at some point, but we'll get back to that later. First, I want you to kind of clear up a couple things with relation to space. Now, when we were setting up for this when we were setting up before to record the conversation, you were talking about how you were possibly going to lose some reception or had some reception issues. Now, the Mars rover beams back all these pretty astounding pictures. You can't get reception in your attic, or I can't get reception in my basement. So how is that even possible?
Great question. I imagine there's satellite relays. I do know that there's an average of about a 15-minute time gap if you're radioing from Mars to Earth, depending on where they are on their orbits. It can be as short as 4 minutes or up to almost a half an hour. So conversations, if you want advice in an emergency, it's probably not ground control may not be able to help you there. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It just astounds me that I can't get reception, but they can beam back, these pretty astounding pictures in up to, as early as 4 minutes. So,
yeah,
it just boggles my mind sometimes. Another thing, I guess, living on this is a pretty funny quote from your book. Living on the ISS has been described as being on something to the effect of a sweaty portable toilet. Where does all the poop go from the ISS and the other spacecrafts?
Okay, ISS. From what I hear, they do eject it into outer space, so it is space debris. Not as dangerous as shards from an exploded satellite, but it's out there, I guess. The same with on the moon from the Apollo mission. They left bags behind, is from what I understand. So obviously, and I think that's one of the big, I talk about in my book, that imagining the technologies for creating self-sustaining ecosystems or enclosed little ecosystems. And that apparently is the biggest problem, is reprocessing human waste. Whether you're there's a program, it's called Melissa, that the ESA has been working on for decades, where it's basically using a lot of biochemical procedures to recycle, as well as obviously plants and water and so on and so forth. So, yeah, and it seems to me that if you're trying to create a bubble ecosystem somewhere, you don't want to lose a single atom, or you're running. It's like a clock that's running down. It seems to me. Again, I'm not a scientist. I'm just playing one on the radio here. I like to think of myself as a historian. So yeah. Yeah,
I can just see a poop asteroid hitting the U.S. hitting the Earth at some point, of all our poop just coalescing from space.
That could be the next calamity in 2020.
That's
Thanks.
the seventh extinction is of a poop asteroid.
Yeah.
Now another thing that was touched on in the book, but seems to have kind of two competing stories. Sex in space, particularly, I guess, how its effect on the male genitalia. Some said impotence, others say natural Viagra. What did you find out?
Well, again, I haven't been up there myself, but t
Not from
talking to
personal experience, but what you've
the
read.
guy, well, I talked to this guy named Alex Leyendecker who wrote his dissertation on the topic, and I'm trusting him. And it seems like the more recent news is that yes, indeed, men can get horny in outer space. As he put it, women aren't saying. And I think his theory is that basically there's so much misogyny and in the space and Air Force and pilot community that women just don't want to be, they don't want to have their careers ruined by saying the wrong thing to the wrong interviewer. Yeah, so that's a blank box right now. But apparently NASA basically, as Leyendecker told me, is just staying away from it because back in the 80s they had a psychologist on their team. Yvonne Clearwater, I believe her name was, who was designing habitats for places like the, ISS, and she wrote a fairly innocuous article for Psychology Today that included the sidebar talking about intimacy in space, and where she said, people should have some private quarters for sexual activity. After all, these are humans, and they're going to be up there a long time, and that's natural. And this became a furor of people, writing letters that are talking about our tax dollars going to these crazed sex experiments in space. So NASA really recoiled, and they apparently hired a full-time PR person as a liaison to Congress because congressmen were getting so cheap on this. So basically, he says NASA just doesn't do these kinds of studies. There's been some with rats that the Russians have performed. And apparently, there was a lot of breeding going on, but no viable births. Of course, they might have been exposing the rats to huge amounts or less shielding, for radiation than you might get on the ISS or on a space colony. But there are some serious issues, Leyendecker suspects, with childbirth as well. And, in addition to living in zero gravity, for a decade or more, you may not be able to adapt to life on Earth. Your bones just might not be strong enough and muscles. So there's some pretty serious issues there. He feels like that there needs to be a private nonprofit that's willing to do this kind of research, to be labeled the Kinsey Institute, of sex studies in outer space or whatnot, because it's for these space dreamers. I mean, this is a real sticking point if you can't really reproduce safely in space.
Well, let's take a look at the future of space exploration. You mentioned before 20 years we think we're going to be on Mars realistically. What about, we'll start with 10 years from now, skip 20, and then go a little bit later on. So 10 years from now, what type of thing can we expect? I guess space tourism would probably be the most prevalent.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I mean, I'm sort of surprised that Virgin Galactic hasn't quite started their flights yet. It seems imminent for the last year almost. So I imagine that's going to start pretty soon. They have their spaceport. They have tested their. Of course, they're doing suborbital flights that offer you just you just kind of reach up to the Kármán line, where outer space is considered to begin, and you get about 3 minutes of zero gravity or microgravity, I should say. But yeah, I think the Robert Bigelow, the Las Vegas entrepreneur, he wants to get these space hotels going or conference centers. You could have corporate retreats. That seems most likely in the next 10, 20 years would be that sort of thing, and some kind of moon, perhaps mining, or maybe asteroid mining in the next 10 or 20 years. Maybe in 100 years, you have a scientific outpost on Mars. Beyond that, I'm not gonna I'm not going to speculate.
Well, it's
Since I'm
hard
a
to predict.
historian.
I mean, technology, in the last 20 years has moved at such a pace that it's hard to follow. Something one year is brand new, the next year it's outdated. So, I mean, it's hard to tell. Like you said, 50, 100 years from now where we could be.
Right.
But some of the future tech that people are talking about that's being worked on, I mean, robots seems to be definitely a big thing that's going to be used in future space exploration. But what about artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, biotech? I mean, how is that going to change the face of
Yeah.
space exploration?
Yeah. Well, I think some people have argued that AI is the way to go in robotics. Just again, getting back to the interstellar issue, basically human bodies. The professor who runs the cosmology group here that I spoke with, he's like, it's like when you choose a house pet, you don't choose a whale, and when you choose who's going to go on an interstellar starship, the human body just isn't appropriate. And he imagined that it'd be more likely, AI systems that could, in some ways, be ambassadors and hopefully getting info back to home base here. So this kind of robotic AI explorations, a lot of people, I think the more level-headed people see it heading that way, at least for the beyond the solar system.
It would be mathematically improbable for us to be the only thing out in space if space is truly infinite. Where do you fall on that idea?
I think, oddly enough, I think you're in the mainstream as far as scientists think about this. And in fact, ever since Copernicus, that's kind of been the prevailing sense amongst leading intellectuals that there was kind of this. I mean, for different reasons. I think back, in the 1700s, 1600s, the idea is, well, okay, we now know we've opened up this idea that the sun is another star, and further extrapolation is, well, stars probably have planets. And then here's where it becomes, iffy. Well, what's the purpose of a planet? And judging from our own experience, the purpose of a planet is to harbor life. And this is known as the argument for plurality, the idea that life is found on many planets. I think Giordano Bruno was burnt at the stake. This is one of his ideas that wasn't popular with the church. So. And I think, obviously there's a lot of stigma attached to these kinds of notions in the 20th century, at least in the U.S. I suspect not as much so in other countries. But I would say right now, I think your argument from probability is where typical of astrophysicists these days and mathematicians. So I'm going with the majority here.
Okay, I feel good about that then.
But let me say though that
No, please. What's your caveat?
My only caveat was that I really didn't work. I debated having a chapter on this in the book, and finally decided it pretty much deserved its own book. And so I avoided the issue, except in terms of the historical figures I was talking about and their beliefs systems.
Yeah, I did notice
yeah.
that you were
Okay.
evading that the whole time.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna that's why I wanted to bring it up, put you a little bit to the fire there.
Okay, that's fine.
Now I think NASA has recently made an announcement that they think that they're close to finding microbial life on Mars. I mean,
Yeah, I think I did hear that. I think that was even last summer, the NASA administrator, Bridenstine, or another person like that, said that it was very probable that they would be finding life on Mars. And I know the recent probe that was sent up to Mars a couple months back will be supposedly one of its jobs of the rover is to pack up these samples, which are there's going to be a very elaborate handoff where they're going to be put into orbit around Mars, transferred to another spacecraft, and eventually brought back to the Earth. I think at least an 8 or 10-year process. But so we'll have some actual soil samples for scientists to look at here. They made it very clear that there were large lakes on Mars that lasted for millions of years, and that there's a lot of water still in the soil, and there's a chance that there's still. Certainly, they might find fossil forms, but maybe or traces of, there may actually be some still around today.
Yeah, bringing it back to Earth sounds like the start of just the most horrific horror space sci-fi film possible right now, especially in 2020 right now.
Yeah, whereas I talked or I listened on to one person by the name of Robert Zubrin who's like, bring it on. There's been asteroids detaching from Mars and crashing into the Earth for, billions of years. It shouldn't be anything new. Some people even argue maybe life came from Mars originally, or.
Yeah, panspermia, right?
Yeah. So there's different levels of caution involved. From the very cautious planetary protection ideas that NASA, I think, is trying to follow those kind of protocols. But other people are saying, let's go ahead and contaminate Mars. It'll be fertilizing Mars.
I mean, do you think life on Earth was seeded from, space, panspermia?
I haven't the faintest idea.
I appreciate the fact that you say I don't know. Actually, a lot of people won't admit to saying I don't know. So fair enough. I guess most of these next questions you probably could give that answer too, but I want to get just your personal opinion. Just let's loosen it up a little bit. So Carl Sagan, at least a young Carl Sagan, said calculated that aliens visit us once every 10,000 years. What are your thoughts on UFOs and aliens visiting us?
Okay, well, I have written about the UFO community. Again, my approach is that of a historian trying to understand what people believe and state. So I really don't. I think there might be something to it. And interesting, of all the billionaires and visionaries that I kind of look at in the book, the only recent, Robert Bigelow, the Las Vegas guy, is very much a firm believer in UFOs and says he'd had his own encounters with ETs, and he set up a whole, pretty much established with New York Times reporting that he was a lot of Pentagon money was funded to him to sort of set up his own Project Blue Book, and they brought artifacts there, and he had experts there reviewing tapes and audio tapes and whatnot, photographs. So obviously he's one of these space entrepreneurs that takes it very seriously. I think a lot of the people that I look at, they just assume that outer space is sort of empty real estate, that needs us badly. So
I'm not even sure Earth needs us badly, let alone anywhere else out in space. Some scientists, this is something that you mentioned in the book, that some scientists believe that the probability of life arising in the manner in which it did would be almost mathematically impossible. For everything to be fine-tuned in the way for life to exist, it had to be deliberate. Essentially that, there's some type of power behind it, a god, if you will. What do you think on that personally?
Yeah, well, I think... again, I took it to the next step in the book, which was that was based on the notion that there could be other universes that had different fine-tuning, different physical constants, different parameters affecting gravity and how stars hold together or don't, whether universes collapse or not. In string theory and in inflation theory, the idea that there, maybe an infinite number of universes. And so that kind of brings it back to the notion, well, yes, of course, we have to live in a universe that would allow for life to arise. And it would seem as if the universe was created with a, design behind it to encourage the emergence of life. But people have argued, well, that just is because we're one of an infinite number of universes, many of them that don't allow for life to arise. And I would say that underneath all this, I think is the idea, how we should approach the realms of science and what you might call whatever metaphysics, religion, if you want to call it philosophy, or what I like to call mythic structures, and whether I think it's reassuring, but in this community, at least with the far out enthusiasts, this idea that we have a destiny bred into the cosmos of leaving the Earth and doing grand things, colonizing whatever the entire galaxy, is a notion that there's some purpose, and that's it gets rid of certain amounts. It creates a lot of issues of how to survive on difficult conditions and a lot of engineering problems, but it's reassuring on the level of, okay, there's some unfolding meaning in the universe, some kind of purpose, some plan that we may be part of, and that's what I think the big idea in my book is the idea that we have this realm of science sort of cross-fertilizing with these kinds of mythic structures, this idea of apocalypse, if you will, the birth of the death of an old world and the birth of a new one, this idea of, like a Noah's Ark, bringing life to another planet like Mars. And so we're operating on a mythic level and in some ways letting that guide how we want to develop technologies and belief systems in a way. So for me, I'd like to think that because mythic structures could lead you into all sorts of different bayous and backwaters and notions and theories of having to stone people for different sins or whatnot. So for me, I'd like to think that I would prefer to try to live with ambiguity and not to say I have this kind of faith. Or if I had a faith, I don't think I'd want it to be the kind of faith that wrapped science right into it and claimed, because I think that's just claiming a little bit too big a terrain for me.
Really, really thought-provoking stuff. I really enjoyed Star Settlers. Now, something in the beginning of the book that I hope is going to be your next book, actually. You talked about how Silicon Valley billionaires, they're obsessed with space exploration, but they're also obsessed with immortality. Is that going to be your next book? I really hope so.
I'm not sure. That it's tempting. We'll have to see. I mean, so it's tempting. I might step back to something a little bit more grounded, though.
Fair enough.
I'm thinking about writing about science education in like the elementary school level. So we'll see.
All right. Well, I don't know if I'm going to invite you back on for that one, but for immortality, for sure. I'm just messing with you. But give out your social media or anything that you want to promote. Here's some time to do that.
Okay. Well, I'm at Fred Nadis, just my name shoved together on Twitter. There is a Facebook page for Star Settlers. And I do have a website, www.frednadis.com.
And I highly recommend checking that one out. Really mind-blowing stuff tonight. Lots for the brain to wrap around tonight. Not sure if I can quite absorb it, but I will do my best to try. Dr. Fred Nadis. I really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for coming to the Mind's Eye.
Well, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun talking with you.
The Mind's Eye wrap-up when we come back. Mind's Eye wrap-up time, people, and thankfully we secured all those animals in the zoo before we started this one, huh? Did your brains go into your feet, too? I think we may have hit plaid speed, if I'm not mistaken. Did anyone else see that pattern there? Why don't we take a 7-day break, smoke 'em if you got 'em. Join us next week, Catherine Children, who's going to share the unadulterated truth about Shakespeare and his works. Until then, be well and let well be. Listeners, you're out of this world. DJ BJ Turnoff signing off for The Mind's Eye. The Mind's Eye with DJ BJ Turnoff is available on Stitcher Radio, iTunes, and all major platforms. Appreciate you listening. Appreciate you subscribing.